We've spent the last 100 days deep in the remote Alaskan wilderness, traveling off the beaten path to some of the most spectacular cruising destinations on the planet. Alaska is a region of soaring peaks with glaciers that stretch down to the sea, and wildlife like you wouldn't believe. This pristine expanse is home to an abundance of life and tells the stories of a time long ago. But the weather here is challenging, navigating interesting, and with some of the biggest tidal ranges in the world, cruising Alaska is not for the faint of heart. Hey guys, we just spent the last season cruising our 30-foot sailboat around the incredible remote destinations of Southeast Alaska. A lot of you have had questions about our trip, things like timeline, anchorages, fuel and provisioning stops, navigating, and weather, and we are going to answer all those questions and more in this episode.
So this episode's for anybody out there who wants to get up to Alaska in a boat, do this trip, whether that be on a sailboat, on a powerboat, on a kayak even. You guys are a strange breed, but we love you. Just all the general planning stuff, the things that you need to know if you actually want to go out and execute an adventure like this.
So first we're going to cover some trip planning basics. The best cruising season is generally late May to early September, with June and July being the more popular times up in Alaska.
I think setting off in February would be the best time to leave, but you're going to have way crazier weather, way more southerlies, and you're going to need heating and a more robust boat and all that kind of stuff. So general consensus is that kind of end of April, early May, as the spring starts to transition, then that's the time to get going while you still have good southerly winds to blow yourself north before the summer really settles up in Alaska, which happens earlier than it does in British Columbia, so you got to watch out for that. By the time you hit July up in Alaska, it's already kind of starting to shift into fall weather up there. It's much rainier, it's foggier. The rain and the fog makes it really hard to get around all the time, so getting up there early in the season, spending June up there and then coming south kind of earlier than you would think is usually the way most cruisers like to go.
So we left around late May. Actually, we were pushing for early May, but you know how it is with boat projects. It's really hard to get off the dock. When we set out, we were pretty well sailing or motoring in rain most days until we got up to the entrance to Alaska. It took us a couple of weeks to get up there with the weather and everything. Once we entered Alaska, we were basically cruising from June to late August before we had to leave because our permits expired. But we'll get into more detail about the permits later on in this video. Route options. There are an unlimited number of ways that you could do this trip. For us, we basically decided we were going to make a loop out of our Southeast Alaska trip. So starting from northern Vancouver Island, sailing north through the Inside Passage all the way up to Glacier Bay, and then taking the outside route coming south along the Gulf of Alaska and back down into Canada.
The route that you choose, I think, is largely dependent on like what vessel you're going to be in. If you want to sail it and you actually want to sail, then you're going to be mostly taking the outside route, especially in the early spring when there's still southerlies to go north, as well as then in the summer when the wind switches direction is going to bring you back along the outside as well. If you choose to go up the Inside Passage, like in the channels and up around Princess Royal Island and Granville Channel and all of that, generally you're going to end up having to motor regardless. So that's something to keep in mind, just depending on how you use your boat. We certainly motored up Granville Channel and Princess Royal Channel, so we're not purists by any measure of the word. So it's definitely a lot easier to do that in the spring because there's not much wind in there and you can really get out of all the storms, so you can make good miles up quickly to get up into Southeast Alaska, which is, if you're doing the trip, it's really where you want to get earlier in the season. So that's just something to keep in mind.
And we made videos about our entire trip up to Southeast Alaska, from leaving northern Vancouver Island to getting to Glacier Bay. And we covered a lot of this in detail in those videos, so you can go and check those out if you want more specifics about our route and our cruising itinerary. But this is just a general overview for this video.
So if you're going on the outside, the sea conditions will be whatever the weather dictates. So if it's blowing 30 knots from the south, then you're going to have really stacked up swells, hugely affected by the current. On the inside, because it's the Inside Passage, and this is why everybody loves to go up there, is you see very little sea state unless you're in a very wide channel with a lot of wind. So most of the time you're pretty safe just motoring around, even if it is like adverse conditions out, wet, rainy, windy weather. You're not going to actually put the boat in any danger.
Basically, the beauty of the Inside Passage is that you can remain in protected waters for almost the entirety of your trip. There are just two main cruxes of the Inside Passage, which is Cape Caution and Dixon Entrance. So those are the only 2 points when you really are exposed to those open ocean swells that are coming in from the west.
Crossing around Cape Caution, going north around Cape Caution, you definitely want to time your timing to do that one. We've created a whole video that explains the nuts and bolts of doing that passage. And then the second one you want to keep an eye out is for around Dixon Entrance as well, because you get a lot of current coming in and you get wind against current and all of that nasty stuff, which can be really uncomfortable sometimes. And it's also quite a large crossing, so it's got a big fetch that builds up there, so the swells can roll in quite significantly.
I wouldn't say the Inside Passage is beginner friendly because there's so much tides and currents that you need to deal with. You need to have a really good understanding of land affected winds. There's also a lot of ice up in Alaska.
There's some real specifics to getting up and around up there, the currents, the ice, all of that, the wind, how it funnels through the land. But in terms of the complexity of like understanding high latitude sailing, I feel like Alaska is kind of like a real entry level into some of the more nitty-gritty parts of like adventure cruising, which is I think why a lot of people want to go up there. The wilderness aspect of it, the remoteness, the self-sufficiency access. Meanwhile, it's still kind of like set in a really developed country where, you know, there's a lot of safety nets and all of those things. If you have boat tow US or sea tow in Canada, like somebody can come pick you up if there's like anything that happens. You know, there's coast guards in both countries. The charts are incredibly accurate. So all in all, it's kind of like a real nice like entry-level adventure to getting into like some of the more wilderness-style cruising. Navigation and route planning. Where did we go? How do we get there? How do we know what to use? Alison and I just use electronic charts with Navionics. We have an external GPS on the boat, which just keeps us pretty accurate. But we've found that the charts in Southeast Alaska and the charts in British Columbia have been like pretty reliable so far. Yep. Even to the point of like the rocks being exactly where the rocks are. Usually somebody has added a note on Navionics already if the chart is inaccurate. So that's been pretty good. We trusted that throughout the entire trip and we didn't run into any trouble. And for all you old school guys who say you need to carry charts, we have like multiple devices with Navionics loaded on it, and we still only just used the one. As far as cruising guides to find our information to work out, we still stand by this one, Cruising Southeast Alaska, Exploring Southeast Alaska. Don Douglas and Renee Hemingway Douglas, they wrote the Bible when it comes to cruising.
This is actually a book written by powerboaters, rich in information with regards to anchorages in Southeast Alaska. If you want more information about routes to take as a sailboat with wind and those sorts of things, there is a book called North by the Wind. I'll put the links to these books down in the description so you can check those out, but those are the two books that we would recommend and really the only ones we did use. Cruising guides, Navionics, talk to locals, get local recommendations for where to go. You can also just go with the wind. See where the wind takes you and see where you end up. That's also a really beautiful way to travel. But we'll be sharing some of our favorite anchorages and destinations towards the end of the video, so stick around for those.
Customs and immigration. My favorite topic. You get a real good easy time. So if you're Canadian or from the States, then like not really a huge concern. But if you come from a country that is not Canada or the States, then yes, you need to go jump through the immigration hole. You want to jump through the immigration hoop, you got to jump through those loopholes.
And are you US or Canadian?
I'm Australian and my partner is Canadian.
And I-94 was issued when?
Just 3 weeks ago.
Oh, okay, so you went through, say, Seattle or whatever?
Bit more of trouble with mine. I had to get a visa waiver before going, and you can't get one when you enter the US on a boat. So I had to actually physically go down to Washington State before the trip, go get a visa waiver, and then drive back to our port.
So basically our time started ticking once James left Washington. So driving back to the boat and then getting the boat through northern Canada, we were basically losing time from your 3-month permit. So once we got into Alaska physically, we only had about a little more than 2 months to cruise around the entirety of Southeast Alaska, which was really tight in terms of a timeline. This, for us, looked like traveling at least 30 nautical miles a day, every day of the trip. If we stayed in places a little bit longer, then we would have to travel even further the next day. So it started to compound. We definitely felt the time crunch. There is a lot to see in Southeast Alaska, and honestly, 3 months it's not enough time.
No.
If you have an option to, say, leave your boat in Alaska and spend 2 seasons up there, we'd highly recommend it. And that would allow you to have more than a couple of months cruising up there.
There is only 2 ports to check in and out of when you're crossing the border into Southeast Alaska. So you have to go from Prince Rupert to Ketchikan. I'm planning on sailing my sailboat up to Ketchikan, and I was just calling to request permission to stop at Foggy Bay. The crossing to Alaska, we're planning on going to Ketchikan from Dundas Island here. It's about 60-70 nautical miles. If you give them a call, they will let you stay at Foggy Bay, which is over on the mainland. It's about halfway, and they just like to know the amount of boats that are going to be stopping there. It's the only place you can stop off before checking into customs in Ketchikan. So if you intend on going to Foggy Bay, it's really, really important to give them a quick call and just let them know about your plan.
And are you filing for a cruising permit on Rome?
Yes, that was my intention. The US makes it really easy. They have this like US Rome app now where you can put all of your boat information and your passport information in, and they just like can approve you or We've been cleared. CBP has cleared us through the Rome app, which is amazing because that means we don't have to go anywhere physical for somebody to come on our boat and go through our bilge. But then when you come back to Prince Rupert, you actually have to physically go to the marina, pick up the telephone, call customs, let them know that you're there, which is a real pain. So yeah, that's the nuts and bolts of that. Anchorages and Moorage. So Southeast Alaska, British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest in general is just this massive archipelago of islands. It's absolutely huge, and literally like there are hundreds of chartered anchorages that people have used in the past, but there are like literally thousands of places you could anchor and put a boat.
So throughout our trip, we really tried to get off the beaten path and get into some of the remoter areas of Southeast Alaska. We spent days at a time anchored up near the glaciers, Tracy Arm, Endicott Arm, LeConte Glacier, all around the Stikine ice field. Those anchorages aren't in cruising guides, so that required a lot of research on our part. What sort of topography was in these places, the landscape, to be able to drop the hook in those remote areas.
If you're wanting to get out off the beaten path, then like make sure you bring plenty of anchor rope. You don't need lots and lots of chain, but what you need is lots of rope, lots of road, lots of length, because of the common theme that we continue to see is that like whenever we're anchoring in more remote places, we end up anchoring really, really deep, just because the fjords come up so steep, and we usually end up anchoring in about 100 feet or 30 meters, and just having enough line on the boat to be comfortable that you can get the boat tied up in any situation is usually the approach we take. Our anchor is straight out this way, and our stern line is straight out that way. As I let the anchor rode out now, I can pull stern line back in, and that'll shift the boat back further towards shore and then more out of the main part of the swell. And it'll also improve our scope and angle. We carry an extra 200 meters of rope on the boat over 2 different lines, and we use that in combination with our stern anchors just so that we can position the boat wherever we would need to be when we get out there. If we had it, maybe we'll do this on the next boat, but forward-facing sonar would be probably the bee's knees when it comes to doing that activity. That way you can actually see really clearly what the ground is doing in front of the boat as you're motoring around, rather than just getting a number that shows you directly how deep the water is beneath the boat. So yeah, that's really all you need, is just like a sense of adventure and a ridiculous amount of line.
Having some good ground tackle. We've had our Rockna now for 5 years. We've only dragged anchor maybe once, and it wasn't a good set when we did it, but we have had no issues other than that. So yeah, that's been amazing. Yeah, that Rockna sets every single time, and I know that a lot of people down in the tropics seem to say that it gets full of like kelp and grass and stuff, but we've never run into any issues with its setting or resetting for that matter. A lot of the anchorages in Alaska are quite muddy and gunky. There were a few that were rocky bottom, but for the most part, you're looking at good, muddy, holding, glacial silt. That's what you want. Good solid mud holding. Lots of sediment that's been sitting there for a long time and is just compressed. So a nice sharp pick that can just pull straight into it has really been the winner for us.
Marinas, we'll just say that in British Columbia there is not really much to see in terms of marinas. The northern part of British Columbia is probably the most remote part of the trip, both from a provisioning perspective as well as the, towns and townships perspective as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, once you get into Southeast Alaska, the completely different game change. There's towns like every day or two, there's places to get groceries regularly. The marinas are really simple. They're all kind of like the one harbor authority, so you just call them up on the radio and they're pretty good with just like hot bunking boats non-stop throughout the summer as the fishing fleet comes in and out. So yeah, you just call them up and get in. Only problem I have heard is if some people have larger boats or large catamarans, it can be a little harder to kind of get into some of the fishing docks. But everybody in Southeast Alaska is super friendly, so just like give them a call, and just like people have always been so willing to help us with our problems.
So provisioning and supplies, we had no issue getting groceries while we were in Southeast Alaska. British Columbia, that northern stretch of BC, is definitely the most remote. So having enough to get you from, say, Port Hardy here on northern Vancouver Island to Prince Rupert, which is about a week to 2 weeks, depending on how slow you want to go. After that, the towns become much more regular. So you're looking at Ketchikan, Petersburg, Juneau, Sitka, all great places to reprovision. They've got everything you need and you don't need to worry too much. The prices are a little bit higher, I would say, at least for us here in Canada. So we did stock up before we went. We basically filled the boat with our non-perishables that we needed throughout the trip, and then we just needed to stock up on fruits and veg and some, breads and things like that along the way. In our videos, you might have seen that we were pretty out there. We basically took our boat up all of the remote fjords that we possibly could in our timeline. So we did spend a lot of time off-grid and away from services. It wasn't an issue because there was such great provisioning in the towns we did stop at. For example, when we stopped in Ketchikan, we were able to completely re-provision the boat after coming up the entire BC coast. From there, our next port of call was Petersburg. In Petersburg, we were also able to re-provision the boat fully before we went off-grid for an entire month to explore all of the glaciers that are in the Stikine icefield area. So between Petersburg and Juneau, we did about a month off-grid. We were able to re-provision in Juneau.
Yeah, they got a Costco.
Yeah, amazing place to stock up everything you could ever need. Then basically can get you through the rest of your time going to Glacier Bay and coming down south back to Prince Rupert. There's lots of other little towns along the way that you can stop into. Pretty impressed by the quality of the produce for such a remote town, like lettuce, snap peas, looks super fresh. There was a good variety of produce almost everywhere we went. Pretty affordable. Obviously the smaller towns had more expensive fruits and vegetables. Pretty well able to get everything we wanted, except for bread. For some reason, bread was really expensive and really not good. So if you have an oven on board your boat, highly recommend learning how to bake bread. We don't have an oven, and that's something I really wish we did have because that was hard to find. We basically lived on potatoes and other carbohydrates, rice, things like that. Yeah, really good food options and fuel, very easy to find. There's diesel everywhere. The
fuel docks are amazing. Probably some of the best fuel docks I've seen.
Yeah, they grab your lines. They're
excellent service.
There to greet you. There's free popcorn. It's
unbelievable.
Kind of a different world compared to our fuel docks in Canada.
We have a 14-gallon fuel tank for the engine, and then we have 15 gallons of fuel that we carry on deck. So really only 2 fuel tanks worth of fuel. And that lasted us really well. We actually ended up burning more diesel for heat than we did for propulsion, which was really interesting. We had to run the heater nearly for the entirety of our time up in Southeast Alaska, and that burns almost a gallon of fuel a day when you're running it non-stop. So it's something to factor in.
We cook all of our food using propane, and that was also exceptionally easy to find. Basically, all the major ports had propane, and we were able to go about a month using our
10-pound little cylinder.
Hope that's helpful for you guys. Water can get absolutely everywhere. Any town, community will have water. There was only one time I think we filled up using jugs from a waterfall.
And that was mostly just for the fun of it.
Yeah, I think we wanted to take a shower that bad, and we wanted a nice long one. So we got some cold water from a waterfall.
We do not have refrigeration, but getting ice in Southeast Alaska also very accessible, not only from the glaciers, but also pretty well every town that is like doing fishing has an ice making plant, and they're pretty good with like just ice by donation. Go fill up as much as you need, shovel it out of the cooler. The cooler's usually just sitting there on the street or on the dock, or there's a sign saying, you know, pay by donation ice that way for the cruises. So it was really accessible. And then the glacier ice, which is absolutely everywhere, basically from Petersburg out to Glacier Bay and onwards, also lasts exceptionally well.
Do you need a heater if you're going to Alaska?
No. No, but do you like being happy and warm and dry?
Yes.
Is really the question.
So we installed a pretty beefy Sigmarine Dickinson diesel heater before we took off for Alaska. We weren't really sure how much we were going to use this. We knew we would need it to help battle some condensation issues on the boat since our sailboat is not insulated, but we basically relied on it most days, whether just for internal happiness and condensation and warmth.
Yeah, there's something about just a glowing, flickering heat source when it's cold outside that just makes you feel better about life. So just from an emotional satisfaction level, it is worth it. In terms of like the amount of moisture that's in the boat just from the condensation, the ocean is so cold up there. When you're up the inlets and it's like 3 or 4 degrees of water temperature, just the amount of condensation that forms inside the boat is unbelievable, just from cooking, from breathing, from everything. Really nice today. We've been running this diesel stove while underway so we could duck down here and get out of the weather and warm up. And it's actually really, really nice to like just come down after doing all that, and the boat already is like warm and dry. But just having that drying the air out constantly just makes a huge difference.
You might have seen us struggle with some of our V-berth issues. We had a lot of condensation up there. Despite our best efforts, it was a constant battle.
Pretty bummed out this morning about the condensation situation underneath our mattress in the V-berth. We did initially insulate it with like, you know, the foam exercise mat stuff, which worked, it helped. But when we were in Prince Rupert, we picked up some 2-inch thick, like construction foam, proper insulation, and that really created a good thermal break underneath us to separate our bodies and our mattress from like the coldness of the ocean and the condensation that was forming. So recently we got sent a Froley system from Froley, so thank you Froley for sending us that, and all of our people who have suggested that we get one. We're going to give it a shot here, and we'll let you know how it goes. We have 300 watts of solar on the boat, and then we also have 400 amp hours of lithium iron phosphate. That's been working really, really well for us so far. We get usually pretty well consistent use out of it when we're cruising.
Because the weather is a little dreary in the summer, you don't have a whole lot of sunshine. So for folks who are relying on solar for their energy systems, we did find that we were running low on power, especially during those like really gloomy weeks in July where it rained a lot.
If you're thinking you're going to bank on solar, you can do it, you can get through it, and would recommend having maybe an alternative way to charge your system, whether that's directly off the, you know, diesel engine or like a wind generator or a Honda generator if you really have to.
Yeah, although you don't want to be that guy in the Anchorage with the noisy generator.
You mean the power boater?
Yeah, all you power boaters. The weather conditions in Southeast Alaska are a little less tolerable for folks than most people are used to. You do see a lot of rain, fog towards the end of the summer, and just generally more cloudy days. It is a rainforest, so what makes the place so beautiful is that there is constant wetness and dampness. So be prepared for that. It is also chilly up near the glaciers. Very chilly on your face though. I feel like I'm downhill skiing. Whew!
I guess a lot of people, when you come from like the Vancouver area, Puget Sound, down south here in the Pacific Northwest, we're really used to the settled summer weather with northwesterlies, sunshine. And that's all driven by the North Pacific High, which is this big high pressure system that sits out kind of off Haida Gwaii and like blows all of the settled weather down into British Columbia and back into Washington State throughout the summer. But what that high pressure system does is keep all of the low pressure systems that come out of the Arctic stuck up in the Gulf of Alaska. So we were expecting to have sunshine up in Southeast Alaska, but you do not have sunshine. What you have is little low pressures that move through every week or so, and then a little bit of summer weather between the low pressure systems. So the weather systems are constantly changing up there, and it's all dictated from where the North Pacific High is sitting. So that's just something to keep an eye on, is your offshore weather forecasts for a better indication of what is going on in Southeast Alaska. NOAA does all the forecasting in the United States, so you can pick them up on your radio. You can go online and look at the NOAA forecasts. They're pretty accurate, we've found. Actually found their like online maps to be a little bit more useful, just to kind of give you some wind gradients. Predict wind also was pretty accurate for up there, just depending on which forecast you were using. Windy, also pretty good. We don't use windy, but it works as well.
We found being flexible with our cruising plans really made for a more enjoyable experience. So instead of sticking to a schedule and just getting up every morning and going, what we found was that the weather was really favorable for leaving in the afternoons. Generally, the inflow breezes start to pick up in the afternoons, and so you almost always have wind later in the day. And because the days are longer up north, you can basically cruise until midnight or even later if you need to. We would often leave around 2 p.m. and get to an anchorage around 8 or 9 or 10. And, you can eat along the way and just be working with what the weather gives you as opposed to fighting against it. Dressing in layers. So we were pretty well kitted out in our full ski attire the entire summer.
I'm wearing my balaclava because it's cold and that's keeping my head nice and warm.
Wool base layers, essential. Some good hardy pants. We were wearing the Fall Raven brand.
Not sponsored by them, by the way.
No, but I will provide a link to those pants in the description below since everyone was asking about them. But they were great because they dried really quickly. We basically wore those on the outside and then had our thermal base layers to keep us toasty and warm. A good puffy jacket, essential, wool cap, and rain gear.
Yeah, really good rain gear.
You'll need it. Williwaws and Katabatic winds. Definitely a concern when heading into these fjordal areas where you have temperature gradients and huge ice fields that are really cold.
Cold wind coming off the glacier though, it's all outflow, so we're going dead upwind. You probably could sail in it, but it'd be very light, and there's ice everywhere.
We didn't have too much issues with Katabatic winds when we were up in the fjords. So mostly what we were experiencing were inflow winds, warmer air being sucked up towards the ice fields in the afternoons. When we got closer to the glaciers, sometimes we would experience a bit of an outflow wind, cold air dropping off of the glacier. That was the general pattern, with inflow wind heading up the inlets and then a little bit of an outflow breeze once we got up to the head. I know that a lot of people get freaked out about the Williwaws and the Katabatic winds, but I think that like the true Williwaws and those true Katabatic winds, they only generally occur in the winter when there are like, below zero temperature air sitting really high up, and then it dumps down really, really quick. In the summer, I wouldn't call the outflows that you feel coming off the glacier a Katabatic wind. That's more of just a gentle settling of air. The Williwaws and the Katabatic winds that you hear that knock boats down, they generally only occur in the winter up there. And spring.
And the spring. And probably in the fall as well, but not in the middle of the summer.
Possible, but highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. The likelihood of you getting a 50-knot blast of wind while you're up an inlet in July is very, very unlikely.
What we've learned is that you don't need to be afraid of heading up into these inlets and to these remote places. You don't need to be terrified of Williwaws or so anxious about anchoring, because these are just anxieties. Knowledge is going to help reduce your fear with some of these things, but we really encourage people to get out there and just try their hand at it.
Yeah. You just got to get up and bump around in the ice, which, speaking of which, lots of people seem to be scared of bumping around in the ice, and I get it. There's like that Titanic story. There's like, Shackleton lost his boat. There's been many boats lost in the ice over the years. But Uinta is not one of them. Uinta is an icebreaker.
She proved to be.
She proved to be an icebreaker, but she's just a glass boat from the 70s. She's laid up pretty thick. Not that you still want to bang it around in the ice.
There was a point, I think we were going up Tracy Arm, where we were really, really tired that day. We had not slept well. We got up at 6 a.m. to get a head start up Tracy Arm, which is a 70 nautical mile inlet. And it was very cold up there. We spent a lot of energy filming. And when we were returning and we thought we were sort of out of the bulk of the ice, we missed a piece and hit one at full speed. So we were probably going like 5 or 6 knots.
5 knots is pretty well our full speed, and we hit it right on the bow, and it was probably about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. And there's nothing worse than the sound of like ice grating against your hull.
I ran downstairs to make sure we weren't taking on water, but we were absolutely fine. It just bounced off the hull.
We did find that bumping around in front of the glaciers, even when the ice is really condensed, you can just kind of mosey through it and push it aside without really damaging the boat too much. If you have nice paint jobs on your boat and you're concerned about those kinds of things, fair enough.
There's a big difference between sea ice, like what you would experience up in the Northwest Passage, which is, a whole different ball game. We're not going to get into the details of that, but ice that comes off a glacier, once it lands in the water, it's not moving in mass. You're just looking out for the individual icebergs as you come across them. They're not moving as a unit. They're not going to ice your boat in.
No.
So as long as you can see them and you don't hit them at full speed, they're really not too concerning.
Yeah, and even when you're anchored up in the ice, there was one night where we had the ice completely come in and fill the bay, and then it came back out again, and everything was completely fine. It's only really small little bits of surface ice that move around. Those big bergs, they kind of just stay out in the middle of the current, and they're just trying to get out into the big wide open ocean. A lot of where the glaciers are carving, the ice is more or less stuck in the bay in front of the glacier, and it can't really get out into the open ocean particularly well. It tends to melt before it really gets out into the channels. It makes it a lot easier to get out there and navigate. The other thing we noticed is the ice is also constantly moving. So as long as you're moving with the ice and you're kind of playing the ice dance, it's actually it's a lot easier to kind of snake your way through it than you first might initially think, because it kind of opens up and closes up and opens up and closes up, and you just kind of have to float with it.
Yeah.
It's really cool to float around in the ice and hear all the popping and the crackling and just see all the different shapes and the wildlife. It's just incredible. The tides in Alaska are absolutely huge. There's such a large volume of moving water. Make sure you tie the dinghy up nice and high, because the tide's coming up and there's like 25 feet of tide in here. So by the time we go over there and mope around for like 45 minutes, the water's going to be like 5 foot deeper. So I'm going to tie the dinghy off up here high on the rocks, so that way if it's floating around we can climb up on the rocks and pull it in. The tides in Alaska are some of the biggest in the world. Now, they're not the biggest, but they are still kind of in excess of 20 feet in most places, and that is very significant, because if you're used to anchoring in 30 feet of water, that's almost the entire volume of water. So if you come in somewhere at high tide, drop your hook, think you're good, you're going to wake up in the mud again at low tide, which is definitely not what you want to have happen. And it has huge implications for how much scope and road that you have out as well. If you anchor in 10 meters of water or 30 feet and you have a 20 feet tide on top of that, then you can go from having 5 to 1 to being at 2 to 1 in the space of 6 hours really quickly, and you have to account for that when you're doing your anchoring. Because it's such a large volume of water moving around all the time, there's a lot of current that comes into the inlets, out of the inlets, through shallow bars, through little passages, and that current can really get ripping when there's a big tide trying to push a ton of water through there. We're certainly getting our exercise this morning. We are on the treadmill, we're just chugging away. We're making like maybe a knot, but we're slowly getting over the bar. Lots of whirlpools, lots of boils. Absolutely insane amount of current. NOAA publishes all the data in Southeast Alaska for the tides and the currents, so they're the real resource to go to. We did find that everything on Navionics was fairly accurate though, so we didn't really ever get in a situation where we needed to look at the officially published tides and currents. We just were pretty satisfied with the quality of what we seen on Navionics, and in all of the circumstances when we were calculating slack times and high water times, the Navionics markers were like pretty spot on.
Wildlife. There is an insane abundance of wildlife in the cold waters of Southeast Alaska. It's absolutely incredible. It's one of the main reasons we wanted to go up there. The amount of whales and sea otters and sea lions and bears, eagles is just absolutely unbelievable.
We've seen an elephant seal, which we thought was pretty cool. We thought it was a dead head.
Yeah, we've seen some pretty crazy things up there. We've seen a moose transiting the rapids when we were approaching Petersburg. We pretty well walked into a grizzly bear in Glacier Bay. That was definitely sobering. Some notes on wildlife viewings. There are bears absolutely everywhere in Alaska. Almost all of the anchorages we went to with an estuary, we saw
a grizzly bear.
Grizzly bears. We didn't get off the boat too much in remote areas for that reason. Locals in Alaska do carry rifles to protect themselves.
America, they got guns.
And I would certainly feel a lot more
comfortable
if we'd had a gun. Other than that, you're looking at bear spray, making a lot of noise, and hoping that you'll be all right. Generally, bears aren't looking to attack you. There's been no documented accounts of grizzly bear attacks in Glacier Bay, for example, where we walked into a bear, but just keeping aware of that for sure, because they're everywhere.
Yeah, be very, very careful. You gotta put it in there. How big does it look when I hold it out? We caught a fish. We caught a coho. This is the first coho I've ever caught.
We caught, I would say, a good amount of fish for... Okay, what would you say?
I don't know if anybody on our channel would describe us as catching a good amount of fish.
We'll say we're not the best fishermen.
We have our moments, but generally we are not considered to be the best fishermen on YouTube.
I think this is the biggest salmon I've ever caught.
Al is like a natural born fisherman. I mean, it makes total sense. She's from Newfoundland. It's in her blood. I caught like the tiniest Dolly Varden and you caught this.
That has been a bit of a theme. Sorry, James. You've caught some big things, but they haven't been fish.
Let us know down in the comments if you think Al is like the better fisherman or if you think I am the better fisherman. I think it's going to be a fairly decisive win for Al, but let us know.
And actually, I'm excited to show you guys this current season that we're filming right now, because we have definitely leveled our game up and we are catching heaps of fish and crabs and prawns. So
all in all, I'd say the fishing is pretty bloody good up there. I wish that we had taken the time to move slower to have done more fishing. Because when you're moving, as you were saying, if you're moving like 35 nautical miles a day, which for us is like 6 to 8 hours of moving the boat every day, then it's really hard to stop and fish efficiently or along the way. So you need to dedicate a lot more time to it, but the fishing up in Alaska was absolutely phenomenal. The sports fishing license as a foreigner is quite expensive, so if you do go for it, then go hard.
Experiences, destinations, and highlights you don't want to miss. Do you have a favorite anchorage?
Ooh,
favorite place that we visited?
Favorite anchorages, hey? Whew. They're all so bloody good. That's the trouble.
There are a lot of
There's a lot of really good anchorages.
It's hard to choose one.
I really liked that night where there was orcas all around the boat.
Is this a dream? That was
pretty phenomenal. But I think for me, I liked all of the uncharted adventure anchorages just for the getting out there and problem solving and the satisfaction in being able to go anchor your boat somewhere that, you're away from other people, you're more secluded, you kind of feel more out there, it feels more adventurous. So I really enjoyed all of those anchorages.
A lot of folks head up to Southeast Alaska with the goal being Glacier Bay. That is sort of the crown jewel of Southeast Alaska. It's the northern terminus of the Inside Passage, and it has the highest density of glaciers. Loved our time up there. We actually maybe had low expectations for it because it's a place where everybody goes and you need to have a permit to go there. So we were sort of like, we'll see what this place is about. But it ended up being absolutely mind-blowing. The amount of wildlife there, incredible. The size of those mountains, some of the tallest in North America, and just the general scenery was unbelievable. You do need to apply for a permit. You don't need to book it months in advance if you don't want to stick to a strict schedule. We were not organized with this whatsoever, and we just applied for a permit a couple of days before. Slow boats get 7 days to cruise inside the park, which was, I think, ample enough time to do the things that you'd want to do while you're there. If you have a kayak or something, even better, because you can really get into some of the areas that are closed off in Glacier Bay to engine noise. But if you don't want to go to Glacier Bay, there are other tidewater glaciers in Southeast Alaska that you can visit that don't involve you going to a park. My favorite was Endicott and Tracy Arm in that area of the Sakine ice field, the Blood Glacier. Incredible glacier experiences up there. You know, I think it was the effort to get up there and the fact that we were anchoring in some of these remote places where we wouldn't see boats for days. And just the scenery was absolutely spectacular up there. So I think those were some of my favorites.
Just incredible. It felt like really out of this world. Like you just dropped off the face of the planet.
Yeah. Ooh, and the hot springs.
Oh yeah.
I know I was just supposed to pick one Anchorage, but the hot springs were unbelievable. So there are a number of those that you can visit, whether you're coming south along the Gulf of Alaska or if you're heading in the inside through Chatham Channel. There's a number of hot springs there. We haven't yet released our hot spring episodes, so those are coming up in the next few weeks. Really excited to share those with you. Those are some of my favorite highlights of the trip. But it's really neat that you can spend weeks sort of frozen next to the glacier ice, and then you can spend, you know, another few weeks warming up in hot springs. Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
The outside of Baranof Island, actually, and Coronation Island, and all of the ruggedness of the West Coast is also pretty breathtaking and absolutely phenomenal.
For cultural stops, Metlakatla, Hoonah, Sitka, some beautiful totem poles and really amazing Indigenous history in Southeast Alaska. So taking time to learn the history of the Indigenous people who have lived there since time immemorial, highly recommend. It just really enriches your experience. There's just so much to learn about the history of the people there. We'd love to know though, what was your favorite episode this season? Was there a place that we visited that like really stuck with you that you'd love to visit one day? We'd love to hear it. So pop your favorite episode down in the comments. We'd love to know. And if there's a question that we didn't answer, please write those down in the comments as well. We will do our best to answer them all. So if you have a burning question, let us know. So we are out cruising again. We are not sailing to Mexico, don't worry.
Yeah, we've already warmed up in British Columbia again.
We're just thawing out down here in sort of southern British Columbia. We spent some time in Desolation Sound, buddy boating with some friends and some other channels that you might recognize. And now we've returned to the Broughton's. We're gonna spend a little bit more time cruising around here, getting to some remote anchorages here that we love so much before we set off on another adventure that we can't wait to share with you guys. We'll give you a hint, maybe, about what that is.
It's really far south.
It's not Mexico.
It's further south than Mexico.
We might not even be on our own boat for this one. So really excited to share that with you at some point. I don't know when they'll be released, but
we'll let you know.
You can expect more ice in the future of this channel. One thing we got out of Southeast Alaska is that we really, really enjoy high latitude sailing. And so that's more or less what you can expect from the future of our channel. We'll be back to our regular programming after this episode. We'll be continuing down the south coast of Alaska, sailing out into the Gulf of Alaska.
So stay tuned for that coming up. There's hot springs, there's remote islands, there's anchorages, there's archipelagos.
Some of our favorite of the trip is still to come. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you all next time.